So loads of contrasting opinions and priorities this morning. Lots to pick over with our next guest. The Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice, Shirley-Anne Somerville, is with me in the studio. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
We can see from those two interviews that there's a lot of pressure on Scottish Government ministers as a budget approaches. Nobody said it was easy. Your brief, we should say, Social Justice Secretary, covers welfare, benefits, all that kind of stuff. So you will be heavily involved in all this. I want to come to you with some of what our previous guests have been saying in a second. But first, I mean, you've been making the news yourself for this week. You've been spending some money. You're giving a new winter fuel payment to pensioners, costing, what, about £100 million, something like that?
It will cost around just over £100 million. And we feel that's very important investment because there is a great deal of concern amongst the pensioners right across Scotland who have been taken out of the scheme by the UK Labour government. Right. And we feel that that is important, that the Scottish Government steps in and protects those pensioners.
But you will be giving a lot of money, a lot of taxpayers' money to people who absolutely demonstrably don't need it, won't you?
Well, what we have in the scheme is designed to deal with age and also to try and tackle the pensioner poverty. So we've got more money going to people that are on pensioner credit, but we recognise that pensioner credit in itself is a bit broken. That's the UK benefit that this depends on. And we know that there are pensioners just over the pension credit that are still in poverty.
Yeah, but there are pensioners who are living in multi-million-pound houses who are very, very wealthy, who will also be getting this £100. So, and they don't need it.
Well, the very important part of when you're dealing with social security is actually how do you deliver the benefit and how do you actually put that into practice. And with the data that DWP gives us, this is the fair way of doing it. We provide more money to those older, those over 80, we provide more money for those that are in pension credit, but we recognise that there are many, many pensioners right across the country that will be watching your show today, Martin, that don't receive pension credit and are still in pensioner poverty. And
sure.
We feel it's very important to support
I'm
them.
Talking about the others. I mean, your own Poverty and Inequality Commission, a group of people set up specifically to advise you on how to reduce poverty and inequality, say that universality is a really bad way of doing it. Why are you ignoring their advice?
Well, they don't disagree with universality as a principle in total. What they have questioned
extraordinarily
is
poorly targeted when it comes to addressing poverty.
For this one specific benefit, they did ask us to look at universality and whether, with the £180 million that we were supposed to be getting from the UK government, we may wish to use that money in a different way. What we saw was most of that money getting stripped away by the UK government. So what we've had to come in and do is protect those people that are the most elderly, protect those people that are in poverty, and help those people that just don't get recognised by the UK government, either by the winter fuel payment or by the pension credit levels as well. And that's a really important aspect that we need to do, step in and protect our pensioners. It's a cold winter out there. It might not be quite so cold today, Martin, but it's going to get very cold, and it's important that we are there to protect people.
Yeah, we're kind of going over the same point. Look, what this does prove is that whenever a minister sits in that stool that you're sitting on facing me on a Sunday morning and says, there's nothing we can do about this, our hands are tied as a government, it's nonsense, right? You can do whatever you like. It's about choices. You've made a choice to do this. You've made a choice on child benefit payment. You've made a choice on all those kind of things. You can do it if you want.
Within the context of a financial reality, so yes, we do have political choices. The political choices of the Scottish Government was protect Scottish pensioners when the UK Government left them behind. The choice of the Scottish Government is to protect our young people through the Scottish Child Payment when Labour and Conservative governments have a benefit system that doesn't allow people to deliver the bare essentials. Now, there comes a stark reality, though, that the budget then is used up. And that comes back to some of the difficult choices you talked about right at the start of the argument.
You don't have to give £100 to pensioners who don't need it. You could give it to children who do.
Well, I'm very proud of the fact that we already invest about £3 billion a year in protecting families, on those on low income. That is the political choice that this Scottish Government's done. And that's important that we do so because we saw once again in the UK Government budget that austerity's continued. The Labour Government's perception of how to protect people was very different from what they actually promised before the election when they said there'd be no austerity, fuel bills would decrease. We've actually seen fuel bills increasing.
Scottish Labour are saying they'll bring back the winter fuel allowance. In fact, they'll bring it back to probably a greater extent than you're doing.
Well, with the great respect...
If they get in Scotland, pensioners will be better off.
Let's unpick that a little bit. They haven't agreed on universality. They said, promise, believe us now, and we will deliver something in a couple of years' time.
Like you're not delivering this year.
No, because we actually can't. We actually can't.
Well, it did in Northern Ireland, 100 quid to everybody.
No, that's a very different system. But if I can get back to the Scottish Labour position, there was 2 votes on the winter fuel payment. 2 votes. When the Scottish Government were saying we were actively considering what to do, Anas Sarwar whipped the MSPs within the Scottish Parliament to vote against the reinstitution of this benefit. So those are the actions that they took for. Not jam in a couple of years' time, trust us will deliver. I don't think pensioners are quite exactly going to trust Scottish Labour, just like they're not going to trust UK Labour.
But they can't deliver just now because they're not in government.
No, but the UK Labour government have delivered, and what they delivered was a cut. And we've came in, stepped in and protected Scotland's pensioners, and that's the right thing to do.
Well, let me just ask you, this is all about politics, really, isn't it? There's a piece in the Sunday Times this morning. It seems a reasonably well-informed piece from behind the scenes saying this was like a scene from the thick of it last week after Anas Sarwar came out and said what he would do. You guys were all running around with the back of an envelope, furiously doing the sums and working out how you could announce something before next Wednesday. Does that chime with you? Is that what you saw?
Funnily enough, not. I'm a great fan of the thick of it, but that is absolutely...
Sometimes very realistic, isn't it?
Nothing to do with last week. What we saw was the First Minister many, many weeks ago saying that we were actively considering what to do with the winter fuel payment. What we saw was the Scottish Government bringing forward something to the Scottish Parliament to reinstate winter fuel payment and Labour voting against it. And then your viewers will remember a couple of weeks ago where they had that first really, really cold snap and Anas Sarwar seemed to suggest he needed a press release that day. Then they made up the policy afterwards. So no, this has been going on for many, many weeks. This is the discussions that we've been having within government. We wanted the UK government to actually step in, recognise their mistakes and fit this at source. But what we have now is the Scottish Government mitigating against a UK Labour government. So now, I never thought that would actually have to happen. I'm used to having to mitigate against a Tory government, but to actually sit here, mitigate against the Labour Party, and actually have the Labour government, the Labour Party in Scotland, suggesting we should be doing the same. We're through the looking glass in politics.
Let me ask you about another one of their policies then. Public sector pay rises that your government's awarded this year, they're expensive. And they're really starting to bite now because the UK Labour government has put up national insurance for employers. Would you have given those pay rises if you knew what the full bill was going to be, if you knew this policy was coming down the tracks?
Well, what we've always said when it comes to the public sector, and the public sector, we use that phrase and it's a bit meaningless, but what we're talking about here is nurses, doctors, teachers, those that are delivering vital public services. And we believe it is right to invest in our public sector employees because they are delivering vital services. And it's the right thing to do. And it's
so you would have given them these rises even if you knew that the full bill would be higher than you'd anticipated?
Well, it's also an important way of actually tackling poverty, because when we look at some of the work that's been going on within those public sector pay rises, there's a particular concentration within what we can do to improve those in lowest pay. Now, again, it is a surprise where we have a UK Labour government coming in and actually increasing those employment national insurance contributions and then not being able to reimburse the Scottish Government for that. So
would you have delivered these pay rises if you'd known that was what the full bill was going to be, if you'd known this policy was coming?
Well, I think it's very important that we do protect public sector workers and we invest in our public services.
You would have given them that money?
Yes, but what we were...
Even though you didn't know how you were going to pay for it, budget cuts elsewhere?
Well, we did know how we were going to pay for it. The budget within Scotland is always balanced. We always have to balance our budget. We've done that in every single year in government. But what we would do...
You're complaining this week, aren't you, there's a £450 million shortfall?
In the national insurance contributions, we have the Labour Party claiming this is a great victory, that they may give us £300 million. Now, that may seem a great deal of money, of course, to your viewers, but actually that's less than half what the employment national...
Why should the Treasury write cheques for promises that you've made?
What we have is a public sector in Scotland that's delivering public services. What we don't expect is, Scotland has 2 governments. What we don't expect is for the other government to turn round and actually make a change to tax policy, which is we cannot have a crystal ball about what they're about to do, but then not recompense. Now, that's a disappointing place. Again, I'd expect that from the Conservatives. To have that from the UK Labour Party is exceptionally disappointing, because we would hope and expect to be able to work together. That's exactly what the First Minister wanted to do. do, reset that relationship with the UK government. But we'll continue to do what we can with the resources that we have to, yes, protect our public services and protect those that are in need, whether it's our pensioners or our families through the Scottish Child Payment.
Do you think our public sector is bloated? I was asking Dave Moxham that question just a couple of minutes ago. 22% of employees in Scotland work in it. He was suggesting that it's not a like-for-like comparison with the 17% elsewhere, but it is a big and well-paid public sector.
Well, I'd listened to his interview and he's quite right. And what I would also point out to is that we have more nurses per head of population. Yeah. We have more doctors per head of population.
Do you think it's bloated?
We have more teachers.
Have we got too many?
Well, what, too many teachers, too many doctors and too many nurses? That's the right investment for us to do.
Well, I tell you why.
As a Scottish Government Minister who wants to improve our public services as part of the Scottish Government, as well as tackling poverty, as well as growing the economy, then it's the right thing to do.
Well, the last time Shona Robertson was in that chair, she told me that the public sector had to change its shape and size as a matter of urgency. It was a reality. We haven't seen any sign of that happening, have we? Do you agree? Does it have to be restructured?
Well, what we do have to look very carefully at is whether the structure and the services are done in the most effective and efficient way. That does not mean...
That means losing jobs, right? I mean, in normal language, that's what that means.
Well, what that doesn't mean is taking away from frontline services. So it's important, of course, that we do look...
losing jobs somewhere.
Well, it's important that we do look to ensure that, for example, where more expenditure has gone in because of COVID, and as we deal with the COVID backlogs, are there ways that we can do public services in a different way? So, of course, we have to ask...
Does that mean, are we talking about job cuts here? Let's be clear.
We're not talking about job cuts in a unilateral, undesigned fashion. What we have to look at is, are the public services delivering right for Scotland?
When's that going to start?
Well, it's already started. We're already looking at public sector reform. We're already ensuring that we're designing...
Stop hiring teachers, for example.
What we're already... Well, that's a local authority issue, but how many teachers they have, and we're very determined to support local authority through that. And we've got actions in the budget for this year, because obviously I can't comment on the budget for next year, to actually ensure that local authorities are given additional funding to improve teacher numbers. Talking
of local authorities, and they will say the funding might come from this council tax freeze. One-year policy, hasn't worked very well. Is that going to be scrapped in this year's budget?
Well, the council tax freeze was an important part of last year's budget because there was an exceptional push on the cost of living crisis, and it was important that we took action on that. We were taking action to deal with those in the most poverty, but we felt it was important to help others as well.
Is it going?
I will not comment. I will not comment.
Every newspaper says it's going.
And I love reading the newspapers the day before, the week before the budget, but I'm not going to comment on the speculation.
Answer me this question. If it was brought in because we were in a really crippling financial situation, are we better off now than we were last year?
Well, what we have to do is look at the choices last year, and it was important that we invested in public services.
You have to decide whether it was the wrong choice, don't you? Whether it was a bad policy. That's what you've got to do.
What we decided last year was we were investing in those public sector employees that you've already talked about. We were investing in business relief. We were investing in the Scottish Child Payment. And we took the decision to help everyone through that council tax freeze. The budget coming up on Wednesday will be able to demonstrate how we are eradicating child poverty. We're looking at tackling that climate emergency. We're building our public services and we're growing the economy.
Look, there's talk in the papers this morning. We know some councils were going to raise their council tax by 10%. There's talk of 17% rises. Your government's talking about making people feel better off. Very quickly, in 20, 30 seconds if you can, what about income tax? Bring that down a bit?
Well, the income tax decisions that the Scottish Government's taken allows us to have another £1.5 billion to spend on public services. That's what delivers the free prescription, the free tuition, the 1140 hours in childcare.
Better off,
and people do feel better off because of the things that they would normally have to pay for anywhere else in the UK. We ask people with a little bit more money to pay that little bit more tax, and for that they get public services not available anywhere else in the UK, and that's a record that I'm proud of. That
doesn't sound to me like a hint that it's about to change. We shall see, though. All this to come on Wednesday. Plenty more to talk about it after that. Shirley-Anne Somerville, Social Justice Secretary, thank you very much indeed for being with me this morning.